I'm Bertis Downs. We're sitting in the REM offices in Athens, Georgia, where I am a long-term advisor to the band. I've helped them out their legal and business issues since very early days when they got started here more than 2 decades ago. Well, I have legal training. I have a law degree from the University of Georgia Law School. But I function more as the manager these days. The last, really a good bit of the time that I've worked with the band, I've functioned more as the day-to-day manager, helping them run their business. I think of it as them being sort of the board of directors and me being sort of the CEO with the staff. We do, from this office, we do the fan club, all the artwork, and then a lot of the web and everything that we emanate into the world generates from here. We, a long time ago, resisted the urge to do that from some big corporate office somewhere. We really try to keep it pretty homemade and make it be and appear to be from Athens and from the sort of HQ of the REM world. And I sort of oversee that and am involved in that and generally have something to do with whether we're touring or making records or dealing with the requests that come in, helping. I guess the way I try to define what I do is I try to help the band take what they want to do artistically and have it make sense in the world. And in terms of what my job definition is, one of the things I guess I do is try to know when I can decide something and when I need to talk to the band about it or share emails with the band about it. And typically I better get that pretty right most of the time. And over time and history and working together as long as we have, the things that are essentially executive decisions or that I know what they would want to do or that I just need to let them know informationally, that's one thing. Other things we really need to have a sit down and have a powwow or a conference call or to go through certain things that I know is not my decision to make. It's more of an artistic decision. It's more of a music decision. So the kind of balance of knowing they don't want to be in meetings or hectored all day by me on business stuff. At the same time, I certainly don't want to be deciding things that really is their purview to decide. So that's kind of part of my job. What are the differences in terms of when you're in a growing, maturing phase, burgeoning phase, developing phase, versus when you are already mature, as in successful, as in older, hopefully wiser? And it's a really good question. I don't know if I have a particular answer to that other than to say a lot of the basics, I think, stay the same. It's still about being a good communicator. It's still about judgment, discretion, taste. I don't get involved in the musical decisions and that sort of stuff. But when we're deciding to tour, when we're deciding where to go, we're deciding who to hire, we're deciding who to work with, we're deciding on opening bands, we're deciding marketing issues for records. A lot of it is just, I don't want to say common sense because I think it's a really, really overused phrase, but a lot of it is just basics. And a lot of what a manager does is really, if they're effective, they're just good at communicating both to the band and fostering communication within the artistic entity, if there's more than one person, and then to and from the outside world. So, I try to be really good at calling people back. These days, you get less calls, you get a lot more emails, but just kind of stay on top of things, knowing what balls are in the air, what needs to be done to move a project along. What's best for the band. That's what all of us up here in the office, our whole goal every day, our career is based on what's best for those guys. And we faced some challenges over the years, like the Operation Tour, the tour where 3 of the guys in the band in about a 5-month period had to be hospitalized with pretty serious, in one case, really life-threatening injuries while they were on tour. So we faced that. We faced a departure from the band of Bill Berry, the drummer. And each time, it's like a different set of challenges being thrown at you. And a lot of it's just open, honest communication and figuring out how you're going to handle it and what you're going to do. How I met the band was pretty simple. I knew 2 of the guys in REM before they ever formed REM. I knew Peter from across the street at a little record store called Wuxtree, where he was serving as a clerk. Maybe he was a manager, I don't remember, but I know he was behind the counter, and I would go over there and talk to him about Neil Young records. I didn't have the budget at the time to buy every Neil Young record, but I liked them a lot. And Peter would kind of advise me which ones were definitely worth getting and which ones I should save and get later. And then I knew Bill Berry from our days on the concert committee at the University Union. I was a law student. He was an undergraduate pre-law at the time. And we brought a lot of distinguished acts to campus like Pablo Cruz and Village People and I think Jimmy Buffett. And then eventually, pretty much right after I was out of law school, Neil Young came here and played, and all the guys in the band went to that show. It was on his Trans tour in 1983. So I knew two of the guys in REM before they ever started a band, and then I met Mike and Michael once they'd started and played. I was not at the very first show they played. They played a famous birthday party on April 5th of 1980. I was not at that, but 2 weeks later, they played their first show as REM. They had to have a name, and the legend goes, I'm not exactly sure how true this is, but I'm told that they locked themselves in a room with some refreshments and a dictionary, and they agreed they weren't going to come out until they picked the name they were going to go with. And evidently, I believe it was Michael's finger went on REM, and they decided that'd be a good name. Now, I'm told by another band member that it wasn't necessarily the first one they pointed out in the dictionary, but that had a lot to do with how they had, if they're going to play a show and have a concert, they had to have a name. And so they ended up getting the name REM. They'd considered various other ones, but they decided on REM because it didn't pigeonhole them any particular way. This was a time when there was all this new wave, there was punk, there was Southern music, there was all kinds of genres of music, and some names you would just know that band is a certain kind of band. REM seemed a little more vague to them, and they figured it would probably let them be whoever they wanted to be. It was almost irrelevant to the music they wanted to make. The thing that impressed me about them the very first time I saw them was that I knew they were playing a fair number of covers. They used to play, maybe not as many as half of the set would be covers, but they would mix quite a few covers in simply because they didn't have that many songs. So they had a lot of songs that they'd written, and then they also had a lot of covers they would do. And they were doing these kind of classic covers by, they did Secret Agent Man, and they did songs by the Monkees, and they did some songs by the Trogs. They did some sort of like gems of that kind of energetic pop music from 10 or 15 years before. And I couldn't tell the songs they were writing from the covers. I didn't know enough about the covers to know which ones were covers. All I knew is they all sounded really good. So I'd be with a friend, and I'd say, is this one a cover or is this an original? He goes, well, I've never heard it, so it must be an original. And we took that as a pretty good sign that they already, in the very early days, were writing songs that were just, that's what always impressed me about them. Their playing was good, they looked good, they sounded good, all that stuff. But the songs were really good. The songwriting, it was just of a really high quality from the get-go, from that spring when they were still in college and in their early 20s. I was getting out of law school, and I took a job at the university teaching research and writing as a sort of entry-level faculty. I was interested in teaching, and I was interested in staying around Athens, and I was interested in continuing to work with REM. But at that point, it was very much a volunteer situation. I was just helping out. I was helping out these guys who I knew as friends and that I thought sounded great and had a chance of really making a career of it. So I started helping them out on whatever I could. Some early contracts, some working with accountants, keeping expenses, worrying about things like insurance, just these kinds of business habits that either you develop or you don't. And so I started working, like I say, as a volunteer, kind of a moonlighting job. My main job was over at the law school, and I would go to shows and sometimes go to the concerts that were playing in North or South Carolina, somewhere nearby on weekends. And it became, a few years later, once they had a record deal, once they started putting out records, once they started touring more constantly, it started becoming more like a real job. And eventually, the law school situation became more like a part-time job for me. And doing the REM became more like a real job, became an actual role where they needed somebody to help manage all this. How is the industry different right now than it was our generation, about a generation ago, 20, 25 years ago? It's a completely different world. As I alluded to a minute ago, we didn't even have a fax machine when we started. That was really in the distant horizon, to be able to get this thing over the phone lines that would be like in writing. That just seemed really, really technologically advanced when we finally got a fax machine somewhere in, I guess, the mid to late 80s, whatever that was. I say that only because, obviously, the world has changed so much from a technological standpoint over the last years, and the way that's affected music and content industries in general, or intellectual property, has been huge. Bands, when we were starting out, we used to think of it as sort of there were four possible income sources. There'd be touring, and part of touring would be merchandising. You know, maybe people want to buy T-shirts or something, or posters. And then there'd be records, and there'd be publishing. And now, those four things exist, but there's all these other possibilities too. And all these things are kind of shifting around in terms of importance and possibilities. I think the goal when a band is just starting out now is exactly what it was when we were starting out. Grow. Well, do great music, have a career, have a following, build fans, fan base, spreading popularity. So a lot of that's the same way. There are just so many more options now. I remember a few years ago hearing about ringtones. Oh, right. Like, that's going to be a big deal. Well, it is. It's a huge deal. For some, you know, when we first got started out, videos pretty much had not been. They were right in the very early stages of making videos. Videos became a really important medium for marketing music, kind of in our early 90s period with Losing My Religion and Everybody Hurts and some of those. They're less important now, but they're still really important overseas. They're still really important in places that you're probably not going to get to on tour than they are here for us. So it's just kind of again, to use the term balancing act, I think of bands starting out now, in a lot of ways, have it a lot harder because there's so many choices to be made. But they have those choices, and they can decide, you know, how much emphasis are they going to put on touring? How much emphasis are they going to put on recording? Are they going to, you know, we had a kind of a conscious decision very early on not to do anything involving commercials, endorsements, that kind of stuff. Bands are less concerned about that kind of stuff now. Arguably, fan bases are less concerned about it because people accept it. People compete to get on particular commercials so that people will, it's just another avenue for exposure. I'm not saying that's wrong at all. That's sort of the reality of the world now. For REM, that still seems wrong to us. Something about it doesn't seem right about associating a particular song with a brand or a product, and so it's something that we still don't do. But just the world changes, and you just try to keep up in a lot of ways. I think it just depends on each person. There are all kinds of styles of management. There are all kinds of management companies. There are these boutiques that have a few acts and a small staff. There are big ones that are almost like a major at this point, and they have bigger staffs, many, many more acts. And then there are people like me, and there are a few that just really have essentially an act that they've, you know, staked their future with, that they've devoted themselves completely to. That just seemed like the way to go for me. I was always really involved, kind of on a holistic level, on an overall level, with our guys, and I wanted to do the teaching and living here in Athens. So that just kind of seemed the way it evolved for me. But I have friends that are in one of those sort of small, mid-sized boutique type management situations, and some people I know that are in the much bigger ones. And it works. I don't know that there's a definite answer for that. I see people being successful or not at all those different possibilities. I do think that management companies, this is kind of a trend in the last few years that I think is going to continue. I think management companies are going to get more and more essential to breaking acts because they can get involved early days with artists at all the various levels of their career. The touring, the publishing, the merchandising, the records, the production end of things. For that matter, if they decide to do movies and commercials and that kind of stuff. Somebody who's a manager who gets involved with an act early, supports them early on, invests in them early on, is probably going to be in that position with that act as the act grows, hopefully breaks and gets more popular. I think qualities a manager should have are to, like I kind of answered this in an earlier answer, but it was related to it. I think a lot of basics of human relationships, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of problem solving, a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of resourcefulness, and a whole lot of communication. Being good at those things, hearing something can't be done, figuring out a way to get it done. figuring out a way to be effective. And if you're dealing with a group, figuring out a way to be essentially an honest broker, not someone who's going to take a side, not someone who's going to, it may very well be different. There may very well be managers who do need to kind of force a group to do a certain thing or to be, our situation is that I carry out their wishes. And it's sometimes my job to figure out how to best get them talking, how to best frame the issues so that there are choices to be made and decisions to be taken, and then for me to go do my work. But I think, like I said, being able to facilitate communication within the artistic entity and then being able to represent their interest as it relates to the larger world, that's just basic communication skills. And I think it's just really important to, as you're trying to stay on top of all these different aspects.